Are you here? It's muted. I will just do a quick introduction. Hello everyone and welcome. Thank you so much for being here for this important presentation on the Polyphagous, Polyphagous shot hole borer. Just quickly, a bit of housekeeping. We're just going to be here for the next hour, but just in case you do need the bathroom, you can just go outside this door and turn right. And there's bathrooms down here. We've also got tea and coffee afterwards, and you can just help yourself. I originally found out about the Polyphagous shot hole borer. I normally just refer to it as shot hole borer. When I read on a Facebook group, a gardening Facebook group, that they were cutting down the trees of Hyde Park. And I was like, what? When I go down to Perth, it's so lovely to see those ancient trees that have been planted and thriving for so long. And I just couldn't imagine them being cut down. And as I've learned a little bit more, although I'm really enjoying that we're having this presentation tonight so I can learn so much more, I realise that the threat is really just on our doorstep. So it really is so great that we have Caitlin Fox who's come up, and she's an expert in this field, to give us more information, and so we have a chance to ask questions as well. So Caitlin, I always just say Department of Ag, but it's Department
of Primary Industries and Regional Development.
Yes. Yes,
which
so
is catchy.
Is from there, and yeah, thank you so much for being here. So please,
I don't know where to place this.
I will tell you. Yeah, you would.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks everyone. Yeah, this is a really important topic. It's not a fun topic, unfortunately, that I get to share with you, but it's really important that everyone knows what's going on and what this pest is exactly, what the signs to look for are, so that if you do see something suspicious, you can let us know. There's a lot to get through, so bear with me, but it's really important to understand that background and how the pest works to kind of understand it as a whole. So we call it PSHB because obviously, yeah, Polyphagous shot hole borer is not a catchy title, neither is PSHB really either, but it's better. So we'll just get straight into it with the beetle and its background and life cycle. So there it is. It's not very exciting. It's not an exciting beetle. It's very, very tiny. At the end, you can take a look at the samples and you'll see the little vial with the beetle in it, and it's really, really small. It's 2 millimeters. So when you see it up on the screen, you know, it kind of looks gigantic, but it's really, really small. PSHB is a kind of ambrosia beetle. What that means is that they have a symbiosis with fungus. Different beetles have different kinds of funguses. This one is it's a fusarium species of fungus. There's lots of different fusarium. They're out there everywhere. It's in the soil, but this particular one has come with the beetle. She's very prepared, the female beetle. She's got little pouches inside the mouth called mycanja, where she carries those spores. So once she arrives at the tree, excavates tunnels, and as she's forming those tunnels, she's inoculating the walls with the fungus. There's actually more than one species, but the fusarium is the main one. And it's a nutritional symbiosis in that the beetle isn't eating the wood of the trees, it's eating this fungus that it brings into the trees. So it cultivates that fungus, grows it up as a food source. That's what the adults eat, that's what they feed to the young. So that's the actual problem. It's not the beetle, it's the fungus. So we call it the galleries. Oops, there's the mouse in the way. You can see that there. That's out of the way. So those dark stained areas within the trees, you'll see that in lots of the pictures and in the samples as well. We call that the galleries. That's where everything's happening. You can see the shiny little beetles, different colours, some are brown. The white ones are some larval stages. So it's all happening within those galleries, which is the tunnels. And that fungus causes dieback. So you're probably more familiar with the Phytophthora dieback. This is another kind of dieback, Fusarium dieback. And as that fungus is growing within that vascular tissues of the plants, it's essentially kind of strangling those branches. So that's when you get that loss of, the leaves start to fall from particular branches as that water and nutrient flow is being cut off throughout the tree. So depending on the tree species, this is all extremely dependent on the tree species. Some aren't affected badly at all, others are killed by this fungus. So it's a very wide scale, but obviously in the worst situations, it leads to tree death. And when you've got all of those tunnels within the branches, you can also have those branches falling as well. So that's an issue for safety. So you've got that combined as well, but in the worst cases, it leads to tree death. So that's the actual issue here, it's the fungus, but it wouldn't be spread without the beetle. So they go hand in hand, you need both. So like I said, really tiny little beetle, 2 millimeters, the female, that's the larger one there, the black looking one. They do have wings, the females. They can fly typically 30 to 50 meters, maximum of 400. That's their kind of marathon. As you know, the size of a sesame seed, you're not particularly far. It's just enough to get to the next tree. They live inside the tree, everything happens within the tree, so they're not buzzing around in the environment exploring, they're going to the next tree to get inside and make their tunnels. The little males though, that's the little brown one, even smaller than the female. They don't have wings, they don't fly, they spend the whole life inside the tree they hatch in. So they're not doing anything exciting, they're not doing any of the excavating, spreading the fungus, they're just inside the tree. And that's because of this life cycle that they have here. It's called haplodiploid. It's not unusual for insects, but it's unusual for us. And it's one of the reasons why this is a challenging pest, because it just takes one single female to start a whole new colony. As she leaves the colony she was born in, the tree she was born in, to go and find a new one, she doesn't need to have mated as well before she leaves. She can arrive, make her tunnels, grow her fungus, and then lay eggs. If they're unfertilized, they will all be males. She can then mate with the male offspring, and then she lays fertilized eggs. And those will be mostly females, just a few males in there, but mostly females, because those females can mate with their brothers from the previous generation. So off they go. So very quickly from one female, that population just grows exponentially. So that's a problem. You can't use tools that we have available for some other pests as well. So things like Queensland fruit fly, you can release sterile males into the environment to help you control that population. Doesn't work, has no effect. They just make their own males. So it also means that in these populations, they're almost exclusively female, like 93% female, just that little handful of males to get you going, then they're off. The life cycle there as well, kind of egg through to a mature adult, is happening relatively quickly. 30 to 40 days is the kind of typical. It can be faster in optimal conditions, which is about 24 degrees. So that's great conditions for the beetle, good conditions for us. And that's when that life cycle can even speed up from that 30 to 40 days. So that's usually, you see that cyclical nature. So in winter and summer, that's when you're getting that more up to the 40 days. And then in spring and autumn, that speeds up because it's closer to that optimal. So it's up and down, but it's never hot enough or cold enough here to stop altogether. So they're reproducing all the time. So that's a problem. The life cycle is a hard part to manage. This pest is native to Southeast Asia. They are throughout areas like China, Vietnam, Indonesia, Taiwan. Not a pest, of course, in their native habitat. They're meant to be there. But once you take something to a new habitat, that's when they behave differently. We're not the only ones as well who've been dealing with the pest. It's been in California for a long time now, since 2003, or that's when they detected it. Unfortunately for them, back in 2003, they misidentified it as a different beetle. So they didn't think it was going to be a problem. They didn't do anything until 10 years later, they found it in avocados. So then they started to panic. So it had been spreading for quite some time. Same kind of thing in South Africa as well, bit of an unfortunate story for them too. They formally detected it in 2017, but it was there at least since 2012. They found, in hindsight, they realised because they had some DNA in a trap. They didn't know what it was at the time. And then in 2017, I said, oh, it was that beetle. So it was there again spreading. But they've done loads of really good research, particularly in California and South Africa. Trials, studies, all kinds of things. So we know a lot more about the pest than even a few years ago. So that's really helpful for us. We've not had to start from that kind of ground level, and being able to have those experts in the field come out and help us has been really good as well. And then in terms of it being found here in WA, this is the only place in Australia that the pest has ever been detected, so lucky us. And it was reported to us by a resident back in August 2021, so 3 years ago now, just over 3 years ago. We have an app called My Pest Guide Reporter, and on that app, people can report possible pests, so insects, other animals, maybe anything might be affecting plants. You just take some photos and submit it, and they'll let you know what it is, if it is something to be worried about, if it's just something native. And that's what someone did in East Fremantle. Those are the photos that the lady submitted. So a branch had fallen off the tree and there was all the galleries, the tunnels inside, the outside had shot holes and didn't look good. So she didn't know what it was, of course, but submitted it through the app, and here we are. So very, very fortunate they did that when she did. Otherwise, it might have taken more time for someone to actually notice. And those trees were box elder maple trees, which you'll hear about a lot because that is the beetle's #1 favourite tree. So that was in East Fremantle. So given that that location, we can assume it's come through the port. Can't be sure, but that makes sense with that location. Thinking about the impacts, when you look overseas and see what the impacts have been in those other areas where it's become invasive, you can very clearly see that it's a pest of urban environments. That's where all the loss has been. Loss of street trees, park trees, residential gardens, urban bushland, those kind of areas. That's where this beetle has had its impacts. There's some concern for some agricultural crops, mainly avocados would be the one that you hear about in regard to this pest. In California and South Africa and in Israel as well, the beetle did get into growing areas, and they were very, very panicked, of course. Fortunately, it hasn't turned out to be a catastrophe. The way that the beetle attacks avocados is a bit different than how it attacks some other tree species. So it often goes for the smaller secondary branches, and very luckily the trees have a really strong response, and it's very obvious and a visual. I'll show you a photo of what it looks like after, but you can tell when it's there, and through pruning that out, they've been able to manage very well. So that's really fortunate. We don't want to test that here and see if it's going to be the same, but it's certainly the urban environments where that impact has been. Those are the box elder maple trees that I mentioned on the verge there. So there's 12 of them on this street. Well, there was 12 of them on this street. This is the beetle's #1 favourite tree. You could have every tree lined up. That's the one they're going for. Fortunately, this is a rare sight to see them as verge trees. They're not really used as verge trees very widely, which is really, really lucky, because if the beetle has the opportunity to get into them, it will. So that was 12 trees there. This is in the northern suburbs in Perth. So it didn't affect anything else in the area. These trees were removed over a year and a half ago now. Nothing else since, nothing else anywhere nearby. All the other trees were fine. It got those maples. So if you do have those preferred species, that's when there's the potential for that loss. And that's what they've seen in California as well. So this is an example from there. A very large park, but they lost over 500 trees from that one park, kind of between 2016 and 2017. So that's a lot of trees in a very small amount of time to be lost to this pest. That's kind of the worst case scenario that we don't want to be happening here. But that's the potential, and that's the kind of roll-on effects that's going to have for the environment and the wildlife and everything else. So, but that's what the beetle can possibly do. There was also some modelling done to take a look in terms of climate, because this beetle does have quite a wide climate range that it can survive within, where in Australia is suitable climate. So it's not taking into account the kinds of trees that are in those areas or anything like that, just purely climate. And the red and orange areas are suitable climate. So obviously a lot of the south coast of WA, most of the capital cities and Queensland is suitable climate for this pest. So because of that, I mean, that's one of the reasons why this is a nationally coordinated and funded response, because of that potential to impact other areas in Australia. Of course, nobody else wants to be dealing with this pest. Thinking about the hosts, that's what we call the trees and the plants that the beetle lives within and affects. There's a very wide host range. You know, a lot of other pests might go for a couple of species. Nope, it'll try pretty much anything. It can't succeed in everything, which is the lucky thing, but it will give it a go anyway, because it needs a home, it needs somewhere to live, so it's gonna try. If that's the only tree nearby, it's gonna try. Globally, they found over 500 different species to be attacked by this beetle. We are sitting at 198 different species. So that is growing, you know, that list is continuing to grow. When our field inspectors are out there, they're not just looking at a couple of kinds of trees, they're looking at everything, and sometimes they find new ones. So sometimes in a month you might find, you know, 2 or 3 new species, sometimes you might not find any for a couple of months. So it's up and down, but it's steadily growing, that list. You can break them down into a few categories though, because they're not all at that same kind of, they're not all affected the same. So the amplifier host there is the box elder maple. It amplifies the beetles' populations. Some people call them beetle factories. So once they're in there, that fungus grows really well, the beetles can reproduce really quickly, and they just pump out beetles into the environment. So that's the amplifier. The main distinction is whether the beetle can reproduce inside of the host or whether they can't. So we call that the reproductive hosts are the ones that they can carry out that life cycle, and they can grow the fungus. So that means that those are the trees that are going to suffer from that disease and that dieback. So those are the ones that are likely to die or be significantly impacted. And then you've got the other group, which is those non-reproductive hosts, which means the beetle can't reproduce. The fungus doesn't grow for whatever reason. There's not one factor across all the species, you know, just a perfect combination of factors. That fungus can't grow. That means the beetle's got no food, it dies out. So those trees are usually very minorly impacted. You can just prune off that branch. They're not significantly impacted. So on that list of about 200 species, it's about 50-50 in terms of reproductive and non-reproductive. I think it's 102 are reproductive, and that 102 makes up about 94% of the total detections. So all those ones on that non-reproductive list, it's very, very low numbers. So it's the reproductive ones that we're most concerned about and are at the highest risk. And these are the top 10. So from the past 3 years, all of the ones that have had the highest level of infestation. So like I said, box elder maple, that's number 1. Acer negundo. The thing with this beetle as well is the way it impacts trees. It's even closely related species are impacted the same. You've got Acer negundo, box elder maple is a top preferred host. Other Acer maples are non-reproductive. They can't grow the fungus. So it's a very inconsistent across the board like that. The other 2 of highest concern are the Ravinia, black locust, and coral tree. Some people also know that as a flame tree because it's got those red flowers, but there's a few other species commonly known as flame tree as well, so it gets a bit confusing, but it's the erythrina coral tree. And those 3, those are the preferred species. Those are the beetle's favourites. Those are the ones with by far the highest level of infestation. Then you've got also things like London flame tree, figs, Moreton Bay and Port Jackson are in the top 10. Common fig is also a very popular choice, those edible figs. Polyphagous is preferred by the beetle, unfortunately. Poinciana as well. And then you can even in the top 10 kind of see that really wide host range in that there's something like Mountain Bay fig, there's a tree, that's a big tree. And then there's mirror bush, which is a bush. So I think that's important as well to kind of remember with this pest, it's not only large trees. They go for a lot of bushier, shrubby species as well. So that's why it's important to check everything. Anything with a stem or a woody stem, a trunk over 2 centimeters can technically be infested. So that's pretty small. So yeah, it is more shrubby or bushy species too. You can see castor oil as well. That's a weedy species. And then the geope, that's the eastern state species of the casuarina there as well. So those are the top 10. Obviously, all of this is changing all the time. I don't know what they found out there today, but for now, those are the top 10. They're all reproductive hosts, of course, and none of them are native to WA either. So that's one of the main things that we're kind of seeing in terms of what kind of trees are impacted. It's mostly exotic species. As you can see on the right side there, about 94% of our total infestation is in, sorry, 84, not 94, 84% is in exotic species and just under 5% in WA natives. So again, that could change in the future, but right now it's looking better for those species. They don't seem to be the preferred targets. And you can kind of see that on the other side there. Again, that's total infestation, but broken down by species. So even though box-elder maple is public enemy number 1, most at-risk species, they're not that common. So for that reason, there's actually been more robinias infested because they're used as verge trees in lots of areas throughout Perth, you know, just lining the streets. So there's more of them available. But like I said, those top 3 are the top 3 by far. That's 60% of the total infestation, and it drops off very sharply after that. The London Plain Tree and Moreton Bay Fig, which are the next 2, each make up less than 3% of the total by them, you know, each one. So it's a very sharp drop off after that. So certainly we know the top 3 are the preferred species for this beetle if they have the opportunity to get in there. And the symptoms that we have to look for, because you're not going to see this beetle, you will not see it. It's inside the tree. It's not crawling around. It's not flying around. It's in that tree. So we have to look for the damage that the beetle does to the tree. The main one you can see on the outside is the shot holes. Given that this is a tiny beetle, those holes are tiny. They're 1 millimeter in diameter, which is very, very small. And they're also perfectly round. That's why it's called shot hole. You know, it looks like kind of like a little bullet just fired in there, really nice and round. It could be anywhere on the tree. It could be branches, trunk, something with exposed roots, like a Moreton Bay fig has those large roots. They could become infested. It doesn't live underground, it needs air, so those holes need to be open to air. But any part of the tree that's above the ground, they can get in, which is why as well, even stumps. So infested trees that are removed, we have to stump grind in most cases, because if you've got a tasty box elder maple stump left behind, they'll get back in. So any part of the tree that's exposed, you could see the shot holes. The other thing is that this is not the only wood-boring insect. There's lots of other insects out there, native species, introduced species, that make boreholes into trees. Not many of them are this small though. A lot of the time they're larger, oval-shaped, irregular edges. You can very quickly look at something and say, this is 5 mil, it's definitely not our beetle. Once you kind of get an idea of how small those holes are, if you can stick your finger in it, it's definitely not this beetle. So that's a really important thing to remember, that we're looking for round and 1 millimeter. Then there's the galleries. You can only see this inside the branches. So typically kind of broken branches when pruning, fallen branches after storms, that kind of thing. You might be able to see those galleries where it's broken or where it's been pruned. Again, there's lots of things that make tunnels, but they don't necessarily have the fungus associated. That's kind of staining, so it makes it a little bit more obvious that there's something going on there. The dieback, again, caused by that fusarium. This is a tricky one. There's lots of things that cause the appearance, of dieback, climate, other factors. So we can't judge solely based on that, of course, but you can always then take a closer look and see, is there shot holes? Is there anything else going on? That being said, I've seen heavily infested trees that still looked perfect. So if the tree's nice and healthy, it might be able to fight that for a bit longer versus something that's already kind of struggling. So it's a tricky one, but still good to keep an eye out for. And then this is called frass. Some people call this wood noodles. The beetle's not eating the wood, it just wants an empty tunnel. So it's pushing that sawdust out as it's tunneling. So you get that little noodle of sawdust basically pushed out of the hole in the little cylinder. It's a sign of an active and fresh infestation, if you can actually see that, because if it rains or if there's wind, an animal brushes the tree, that's gone. It's just sawdust, so that'll be gone. So it's actually, that's recent and fresh if you can still see that sawdust. Some tree species make our job a lot easier. They have a reaction. The beetle's hurting them, it's damaging them as it's boring in. So they have a reaction to that. This one in the bottom corner there with the white, that's an avocado. That's called a sugar volcano. So the avocados exude this sugary foam in response to the beetle's damage. So that's why it's quite easy for the growers to see that something's wrong with their tree and prune that area out. Other things, you can see the London plane trees in the top two there, that dark staining dripping down. It looks different depending on the species, but again, it just draws the attention that something's going on with this tree. Take a closer look, report it. Depends on the species though. Some others get gumming. So the figs, that thick white sap that they produce, they're trying to block up the hole, push the beetle out, protect themselves. They get that for many other reasons. It's not only PSHB, but again, it's a sign that something's wrong with that tree. It looks different. That one in the top corner on the right, that's a poinciana. So just some things to look for that could be signs of PSHB. Of course, we don't want this pest in WA. Nobody else in Australia wants it either. So back when it was detected in 2021, it was decided that we need to get rid of it, eradicate. It's a very complicated response. There's lots of different people and groups involved. So you've got Department of Primary Industries is the incident response, carrying out the actions to try to get rid of this pest. And the other main important one is the Consultative Committee on Emergency Plant Pests, CCEPP. I like long names with this stuff. And that's the key technical body in Australia for dealing with plant pests all throughout Australia, wherever they might pop up. And they have the fun job of making all the big decisions. Is eradication possible? And what the actions that need to be taken to do that. So we give them all of our data, the findings, and they say, great job, keep going. If it was to turn up somewhere really unexpected, maybe they'd review that decision. But for now, eradication continues. So part of the response as well, of course, is the quarantine area. It's split into two zones. So this is zone A, that's the inner metro area basically. And this is where almost all of the infestation is. Even though, those female beetles can fly short distances, they're not traveling very far. But if, when I came from the city, I loaded up my car with infested wood and drove it out here and then dumped it, that beetle's traveling 100 kilometers. So that's where the risk is with this beetle spreading. It's not flying, all over and infesting. It's through the movement of wood and plant materials. So that's what the quarantine area is aiming to minimise that risk. So within zone A, people can move wood, plants, green waste. They can move it within zone A, that's fine, as long as it doesn't look like it has borer damage. Of course, you don't want to be moving that. It's moving it from zone A outside. That's where those restrictions come into place. So unless the wood has been chipped down or the plants are small. So that 2 centimetre diameter, anything under that can't become infested. So they're okay to be moved, but larger plants and larger unseasoned wood, that's when it comes into play, because we don't want to be spreading it to the wider area. Zone B, you can see there with the red outline, that's the rest of the quarantine area. That's kind of the buffer, that's the buffer between Zone A, where the infestation is, and regional areas, agricultural areas. So there's only a little bit of infestation in Zone B. I want to keep it that way, of course. So again, in Zone B, people can move wood, plant materials, plants within Zone B, and they can also move it from Zone B into Zone A because there's very low risk that way, and there's already PSHB in there. So that's fine. It's again from Zone B outside. That's where those restrictions come in because we're not wanting to spread it any further. And there's lots of exemptions to these rules. Nursery stockers often can be exempted because the staff can undertake a training course, so they can check their own stock and say, yep, this is good to be moved. There's approved waste facilities where it can be taken again. There's a full list on the website of all of those. There's loads. And there's also permits that people can get as well. If you do need to move a large plant outside of the zone, you can get someone out to have a look and say, yes, this plant's good, here's your permit, you can move it. So there are ways, if needed, that those things can still be moved, but in general, we don't want to be spreading this pest any further. The biggest part of the response is the surveillance and the work that the field staff do. There's over 100 field staff who are out there checking the trees. They go to private properties, parks, schools, verge trees, wherever there's trees, they go and check them out. If they find something suspicious, that's when they take a sample to come back to the labs to be tested. They're also doing all the trapping and the work outside the QA as well, that surveillance, because we know where the pest is and you want to be sure where it isn't. So that's a really important part, that extra surveillance. Getting the information out as well to local governments, other stakeholders, the community is really important through signage, media, kind of things like this as well. Let people know what's going on, again, to minimise that risk of the pest being spread any further. These are the traps that we have. There's 2 kinds of the main traps. The main one is the sticky trap, the one on the top there with the yellow sticky paper. It's a very simple trap. The only thing that makes it different and what actually makes it work is the lure. So it looks like a little piece of kind of white paper there on the top, and that's got an artificial pheromone in it, and that tricks the beetle into thinking that trap is a box elder maple tree. So when the beetle's out there looking for a new home, it thinks it hit the jackpot and found a box elder, and it gets stuck onto the paper. So they're a very good surveillance tool that lets us know where the beetle's active, and then the teams can go in. If you get a positive on one of those, they can go in and find the tree or the trees nearby. Then we've also got trap logs. Those are logs from box elder maples. They're in buckets of water there to keep it moist and fresh, make it seem like it's a real live tree. And these ones are deployed at sites like Hyde Park, Kings Park, the zoo, places where there's infestation and it's being managed, but it's in a phased approach. We're not cutting down every tree at once. It's being managed over time. So you pop these logs there. Any beetles in the area who come out looking for a new tree, instead of going into an actual tree, they go into the logs. And we can monitor the logs, remove and destroy them. And that's getting the beetles out of the environment before they have a chance to get into any actual trees. So that's working well at those sites. Then looking at the treatment, despite all the global research, nobody's found anything better than removing those beetles. So it really depends on the tree. That could mean removing one branch, could mean removing a couple of branches, or obviously in the worst case, the whole tree. Once it's in the trunk, of course, it's in the trunk. Everything's done on site, so they bring the chippers in as well. You have to chip that infested wood to 2.5 centimetres or less, which is quite small. And that's the size that they found that if you do to that size, it kills 99.9% of the beetles. So they didn't find any live beetles after chipping to that size, but don't say 100%, of course. And then once it's been chipped, that material is then taken off to be hot composted. So that, of course, kills anything in there. So you've got that second kind of line of defense as well after the chipping process. But it really depends on the particular tree, what species, and where in the tree is infested, of course. And it's quite a long process because even after that treatment, we have to keep coming back and make sure, if it's something that's been pruned, a lot of particular trees have a really high chance of becoming reinfested. So you have to check that it hasn't become reinfested and check everything else at that place, that park or that property, that it hasn't become reinfested. So that takes at least 6 months to say, yep, this is all good, this place is clear. So it's a long process. And then this is where the infestation is. So like I said there, majority of it is in zone A. You can see rot nest on there as well. And that's a great example of the beetle did not fly to rot nest. It can't possibly have flown to rot nest. So that's been transported there. That's fortunately not a particularly great environment for the beetle. It's quite dry and harsh, so that should be well taken care of. You can see those few cases in zone B as well there, particularly on the eastern side there. But yeah, vast majority in zone A. And the main trend we're seeing is finding the beetle where there's water. So along the river, different river systems, swamps, lakes, wetlands, those kind of areas where it's nice and moist, that fungus can grow. So that's the main trend. So lots of extra surveillance in those kind of areas as well. And that's a closer view. This is a bit of an older map. You can see that blue outline was the old quarantine area, but just to get you a bit closer to see where those hotspot areas are. So obviously it was found first in East Fremantle, so on the south side of the river there, and on the north side as well, but pretty closely following that river. Chemical treatment, it's just a beetle, it's just fungus. Why can't we kill it? It's not that there's no chemicals that exist that would kill both of those things. It's a delivery method problem. It's getting the products to the beetle, to the fungus. They live deep within the tree. That's where the issues have been. So things that you apply to the outside of the bark don't really penetrate deep into the tree where the beetle actually is, where the fungus is. Systemics, so injectables, things like that, they're also limited because they rely on the plant's vascular system to be moved through the tree to reach their target. In this case, the vascular system's compromised, so they don't move through the tree how they normally would. There's some promise for particular cases, low infestation. When there's a low infestation and you can kind of prune, a limb or two and then apply a chemical to stop the reinfestation, that's looking quite promising. But anything that's, beyond lightly infested, there's nothing that will actually work, unfortunately, at the moment. Hopefully there's a lot of new research starting up shortly, so maybe they'll find something, but so far it's only those lightly infested trees that are showing any promise. The other thing is you want something that you are comfortable putting out into your environment. Some of the chemicals that have been trialled, you can't apply near water because they're extremely toxic to fish and aquatic life, and our cases are near water. So you've got that issue as well, finding something that you actually want to put out there into your environment. And just to give you an idea of some of the things that have been tried, insecticides, fungicides, biological agents, combinations of the two, target the fungus and the insecticide at the same time. So lots of good work going on, and hopefully there might be some breakthroughs, but for now, unfortunately, there's nothing that's going to be a cure for this pest. And these are some of our stats. So over the past 3 years, the infested premises, that is the places with PSHB. So that varies from someone's house, someone's garden with one tree to Kings Park with many infested trees. So they look very different and different in size and scale, but 1,400 of those throughout the whole response, including the ones, of course, that have been treated. Over 260,000 inspections. They've looked at over 2.2 million trees at this point. The active traps, 2,700. That's just the sticky traps. And that number is quite low at the moment. We normally sit about 3,500, but they're moving those to new locations at the moment. So that should go back up soon. And we're at 3,880 trees removed and just cracked 1,000 pruned as well. So that's all happened over the past 3 years now. So lots of work that they're all doing. Oh yeah, I told you it's very unlikely that you'll ever see a beetle on the outside of the tree. Hopefully you never do, because it means that the tree is extremely infested. This is just a little video. This is a London plane tree. It's it was heavily infested. Just to give you an idea, that if you saw that beetle, you probably wouldn't think twice. It just looks like a little ant. It's not very exciting. But yeah, that tiny little beetle took out a London plane tree that, that was massive, and it had infestation down to the roots, so it's pretty crazy that something so small can really kill something that big. You can head to our website to get lots of information as well. You can see those host lists that have all the different species that have been found to be infested, both here and globally. There's those quarantine area requirements and an interactive map. Lots of information there. Of course, this is something to keep in mind now when choosing what to plant moving forward, particularly in those affected areas, of course. Just another thing to add to all the things you have to consider. And then just keeping an eye out and reporting anything suspicious. You can report a few different ways. We've got the My Pest Guide reporter. You can either do that on the app or on the website as well. You can also call or email the Pest and Disease Information Service. You can call and just have a chat and see if it does sound suspicious. Otherwise, if there's photos, you can send those through. That's obviously really helpful to get those photos and take a look. Even if you're not sure, it also doesn't have to be only about PSHB. It could be anything unusual. We'd rather receive those reports and say, no, it's all good, it's something native, than not receive it. Because, that had happened in this case, if that lady in East Fremantle didn't report it, it could be a different situation. So, yeah, feel free to send in any reports of anything unusual. I think that's the last one. Any questions? Yes?
Given that it was detected in Fremantle 3 years ago, are there cases that, on your map, that have gone up, spread up to North Perth and over towards England? Are they new cases?
So that's,
or is it a lack of containment, or are you still not quite know where it currently is?
Yes, that's a really good point that you make, because you could say, in 3 years it spread all that way. That's when it was detected. It wasn't introduced then. We don't know exactly, they're doing modelling to look at that kind of thing, but it hasn't spread that distance in 3 years. The thing with this and other pests like this as well is the more surveillance you have, the more you will find. So surveillance has ramped up significantly in the past year. So it would be in a lot of those cases, it was already there. We've just found it now because there's more people on the ground. So that's one of those things that it could have already been there, and we found it yesterday. Yeah.
Second question.
Yeah.
Given that removing the trees and closing the boats is the most effective way to get rid of the beetle, is the current strategy a bit soft, still allowing people to move trees, and the fact that pruning trees doesn't seem to be as effective? You're not better off removing the trees that are infected and removing all the trees in that top 10 in the 400 metre travel area of the beetles.
Yeah, look, it's tricky. Obviously, you don't want to be removing trees unnecessarily when we already have issues with canopy cover in Perth. Um, so it does depend on the particular tree. There's lots of cases where pruning is successful and the tree doesn't become reinfested. It really depends on the species. Some are highly likely to become reinfested, something like those box elder maples, that's a straight remove. They're not pruned. There's no point.
Are they removing polyphagous box maples as a protective measure?
Typically not. We're trying to remove infestation. There are some instances that the landholder may choose. Say if there's two, one's infested, one isn't yet. They may choose to have the second one removed, but that's at the landholder's discretion. In that case, sorry, it's a really tricky one, but we don't go around removing trees that aren't infested at this point.
Are you monitoring those trees?
Certainly, that's what that surveillance is, that those field staff are doing. So we have, we know where those trees are, and particularly those ones we know are highly susceptible, those are re-inspected, depending on the location, 3 to 6 months. Someone comes back, checks again, yep, they still look good. Yeah.
Did you work out how it was rottenness?
Rottenness, that could be firewood that someone's taken over for camping, or arborists going over to do work with machinery that hadn't been cleaned out and sanitized, so some material remaining in there. That's kind of likely.
Because one of my questions is how confident are you that it's only spread on host material? Like, cause I'm just imagining some of these trees, like heavy infestation, there's lots of beetles coming out, and when people like to park under trees, like how
on vehicles and stuff.
Rides and cars.
It's never been something that's been observed anywhere. You can't ever say that anything's impossible. It seems unlikely though. The beetle, it wants to be inside of a tree. They have no reason to go anywhere else. They are, when that female is leaving, that is, I am finding a new tree. So again, it could happen, but it's very unlikely that, they're jumping onto a vehicle, onto someone and then being moved that way. It would be, they're inside of wood that is being transported somewhere else. It's certainly much, much more of a risk. Anyone else? Yes?
From the industry point of view, there's a lot of pallets, timber packaging that's used by the people's goes into state. What is that being monitored? Are they likely to do?
Yeah, because of course, that's an issue in that possibly getting to other places within Australia. So absolutely. Again, it's anything that is seasoned or treated. So anything seasoned for 6 months or more is no longer a risk material, because that beetle can't grow the fungus inside anymore. So it's the fresher material. Yeah, it's a pest of plants, of trees. It's not like some of those other ones that bore into houses or things like that. There's other pests you can worry about for that. But it wants live wood. It needs moisture to grow the fungus.
Yeah. We do brush fencing.
Yeah.
Specific methods, and we send over to the eastern states that product. Is there a way that we can fumigate to ensure is it going to get to that stage?
It could potentially. It's hard to predict what will be next. It's hard to say exactly what would be the best route with that. How fresh is that kind of material that you work with? Oh, okay, yeah. As long as, again, that's happening, if it's happening here kind of thing, the risk currently is low. If it's within the quarantine area, that's a different story. But again, unless there was some kind of change, if you're operating like that here now, that's very low risk. But that, again, hard to say in the future. Hard to say, yeah. But yeah, I keep an eye. That's pretty small, 2 centimeters as well. Yeah. Yeah, it's the diameter that's the concern. Yeah, they've got to be able to, establish those galleries, grow the fungus within. So anything 2 centimeters or smaller is just too small to get your colony going. Yeah, but I keep certainly.
What's the biggest mobilisation?
What was that?
What's the biggest thing that contributes to mobilisation?
People.
Like
Um, mulch is again depending on the size, but if it's mulched up reasonably, beetle can't survive in there for particularly long, and obviously you also get a kill rate by putting things through a chipper and things like that. So it's hard to say. Anything larger can obviously move more beetles and the beetles can stay alive for longer within. A nice big log, you could have who knows how many beetles, hundreds of beetles, 1,000 beetles within, and then you move that somewhere else. So larger items would be at more of a risk than some mulch, just because they can survive in there for longer, they can continue to reproduce.
So is it firewood movement or most people don't just move logs across the metro area, so like establish what it is that's making it.
Yeah, even green waste, that kind of thing as well. There's potential through that. It could be any movement of, it's never actually been recorded. PSHU has never been reported to have infested any kind of nursery stock. So that seems to be a low risk associated with nursery stock, just usually because of the size of those plants. But it's still something to keep an eye. But it would be more the green waste, the unseasoned firewood. That's where you're getting a bigger risk, certainly. Yeah, with the waste facilities, that's a big part of, because that's obviously, a big issue there. We have on our website a really long list of all the, they're called approved waste facilities. So they're ones where there's traps there's routine inspections, and they're handling that material in a safe way. So that limits the risk of spread that way, and that covers most of the, or if not all of the waste facilities kind of in the metro area and beyond as well. But yeah.
So, within those quarantine zones, can you pretty much assume that most of the things that they would sell commercially, like mulch and that, would be free of it? But I guess we can't really, because like a lot of people from Northern go down to Perth and do a bit of a big shop, get a whole bunch of stuff, go to the big Bunnings down there, grab a bunch of stuff and plan it all and come back, do everything in one trip. But we can't be doing that, getting mulch or anything.
If you're buying your mulch from Bunnings, they get their mulch from Rich Grow, which that mulch is pasteurised. So that's fine. If you're buying from a reputable source, it's been hot composted, it's been pasteurised, there's no risk. That kills everything that could be in there. So that's the best way is to go through a reputable source, ask where it's been sourced, how it's been handled, and just get that information. Because if it's gone through that process, it's treated and it's safe. So that's the best way is to just ask where it's what has happened to it.
So we can move with products that are not, is that only if it's chipped below that size, or are you saying we can buy mulch down there?
If you're buying from Bunnings a sealed bag of mulch, that's from Rich Grow, that's not,
not sealed ones, they don't count.
From some random, that's where you get the risk, right? If you're just going to some person off marketplace and loading up, that's where you might have a risk. But if you're buying something from an actual business, then they've got that. No, that's all good. Any other questions? Yeah.
What's the potential economic impact if this gets out to, say, the avocado farms and mango plantations?
Yeah, it's looking at those overseas examples, avocado is the only crop that's been impacted in any way, anywhere in the world. It got close to some other, in South Africa, it got close to macadamias, pecans, there's concern there, and nothing seems to have happened. There's no reports of anything. So it's only avocados that have had any impact. Fortunately, it's all been good news. We had one of the researchers from California, her name's Dr. Shannon. She was over here just a couple of months ago now, and kind of explained how it's been working there. And it sounds really, you know, in the beginning, they were obviously extremely concerned that this was going to be devastating, and that's not what's happened. The growers apparently don't remember the name anymore. It's become that much of a non-issue, and just through pruning, sanitizing, you know, the equipment that you're working with, and just monitoring, they've managed it extremely well. So you don't want to test that theory, but it's the urban canopy cover that's where the issues are going to lie. The other thing, of course, is, you know, looking at overseas examples. You don't know if it's going to do the same thing here, so that could be different. But if we're going based off of that, it looks promising. Yes.
Is it getting any less, or is it just steady, the infestation at the moment?
Again, it's hard to say because we are continuously increasing the surveillance. So the more you look, the more you find. So that makes it tricky. If we stop looking tomorrow, you couldn't say there's no new detections because we didn't find it. So it's hard to say. It's up and down with that, especially with the temperature. You know, winter, you do see a drop in the infestations because of that life cycle gets longer. So you see that decrease. Typically May and September are the peak flight periods, they call it. So that's when, if those females are going to leave, that's when they leave. But there hasn't been a huge surge in numbers following, you know, that peak flight period. So that's promising. Was there one over here too? Yeah.
I work at a nursery.
Yeah.
Native plants mainly.
Yep.
Part of their organisation also has Indigenous rangers who travel around the wheat belt. I didn't know that you had some training.
Yeah.
Some opportunities.
Yeah.
Is that something that DFID delivers, or?
Yeah. So
obviously for training staff.
Yeah, definitely.
That sort of thing, and if the rangers are out on country,
keeping an eye. That's
extra level of
that's been a really big part, is particularly with the local governments in that quarantine area, is getting all of their staff. They've got a bunch of staff who are out there every day in the parks, in the area, so training them all up to be extra surveillance for us. So certainly there is a training course on the website that anyone can do, and that kind of just runs you through you know, that kind of background and those signs and symptoms. If there's a larger interest, we can also, you know, run a webinar, run in-person training, depending, you know, location-wise. So that's, yeah, definitely something that can look at, because, yeah, any extra surveillance is a plus for sure. Yeah.
You showed that pie charts of like the most commonly infested species, and you said the native trees were kind of a small slice of the pie, but is that just because it's been in the city and it hasn't so much come out, any more regional areas where there might be more native forest and that sort of thing?
Part of it is to do with the reproductive versus non-reproductive. So yes, there are some WA natives that are reproductive, but not at, I suppose, as a higher rate as the exotics. So that's one of those things that if that fungus can't grow, that's not going to change for that species. That there are still some that we're certainly keeping an eye. But I mean, a lot of the areas, particularly in the kind of wetland areas, and those, there's lots of native trees, and you'll find you know, a heavily infested coral tree, and none of the surrounding vegetation becomes infested, you know, kind of thing. So there's at least a handful of species that we can say this species has been growing in close proximity to highly infested trees and has not become infested. So that's looking good for some of those species, those WA natives particularly. Yeah. Yeah.
Is it possible to get this slideshow be up?
Yeah, I can send that through so it can be distributed. Yeah.
I'm just letting you know that we have live streamed this session as well, so it's available on the Shire of Northern's YouTube page. Thank you so much for coming. I feel much less alarmed than what I did. I really was like, bunnies and, you know, down the hill.
Don't worry about bunnies.
And now I feel much more at ease. Obviously, it's still something, a big risk, something we need to be aware of and keep an eye out for. But yeah, really, I'm so glad that you came up for that to educate us as well. And flyers and information.
Yeah, I've got heaps of flyers. There's a fact sheet, a back and front fact sheet with lots of information. There's a little fridge magnet and those little cards with the ruler and the magnifier. Especially if you are looking at shot holes, you know, in a tree. Sometimes if you don't have anything to scale, you might go, yeah, those are pretty small. And then when you actually measure it, they're 3-4 mil. So it helps to have that, and especially if you're submitting any photos so that they can take a look as well and see that size, something to scale. So there's lots of those as well. And take a look at the samples too. So you can see what it looks like.
So it's 6:30, so we'll leave it here, but of course you're welcome to stay and mingle, have a cuppa, have a look at the samples, get some brochures and ask more questions if you want. But thank you all so much for coming, really appreciate it, and thank you so much for your time.